Oh,
Let's go.
Oh, hey, Brent, before we get started, do you think you could shimmy to the middle of the screen for me? Shimmy, 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 shimmy. Thank you.
always a great way to run into the weekend is seeing a grown man shimmy on camera. All right, welcome back to another DirectConnect. We got Brent Castegnetto and Leonard Chamberlin joining us today to talk about CSMs, CIP Senior Managers, not to be confused with Command Sergeants Major. Keep that in mind. Gentlemen, how you doing?
Doing well?
Good, thank you. Cold weather is here. It's the most miserable time of the year.
Big man weather. I love it. Let's jump in with, let's start right off the top there. How do you define CIP Senior Manager? Leonard, let's see what you got.
Well, I will, of course, defer to the NERC glossary of terms because this is an official defined term. CIP Senior Manager is a single senior management official with overall authority and responsibility for leading and managing implementation of and continuing adherence to the requirements within the NERC CIP standards, CIP 2 through CIP 11. Clearly, the standard, the glossary needs to be updated because we've got a few more CIP standards that are not referenced there. So I guess your CIP senior manager is not responsible for 12, 13, or 14.
Does that mean those are O&P standards? Oh, wait, that's a whole different.
Yeah, there's a lot to pull apart in that definition. A single senior management official. So that's one piece. Overall authority and responsibility for leading and managing. So that authority and responsibility is also a key piece. Leading and managing the implementation and continuing adherence to the requirements. And then again, as we were just making light of the scope of their responsibility. You know, when you think about this, a CIP senior manager, is that required to be, like a manager, like right down in the weeds working in the CIP standards, or is it intended to be kind of a higher level executive, C-level type person? Based on the way it's written, either one works, but the key is having that authority and responsibility for ensuring the ability to lead that implementation and continuing adherence. So whoever this CIP senior manager is in your organization, if they're too far down embedded in the org chart, they may not have that sufficient authority to ensure the implementation.
I think one of the challenges, Leonard, you mentioned, kind of you defined it quite well.
Thank you.
One of the challenges you see is right sizing for the organization, because not every entity is the same, right? You're going to have a variety of levels and a variety of personnel that play at those levels, and so right sizing it, I think, is really important. And I think you can establish that with that overall responsibility and obligation to manage the overall program with, well, where does that fit, right? We need to look in our organization internally and say, where does that fit for us? If I'm a large vertically integrated utility, maybe that's at a higher director level. If I'm at a smaller muni or a smaller utility, GOP only, that may change. I may be at the manager level. So right sizing it for your organization, I think, is absolutely crucial so that you can effectively manage the overall obligations that you have, and you have enough horsepower, both from the top down and the bottom up folks to kind of work at those levels.
As you're talking about directors and vertically integrated, I mean, I think that's one of the pain points we've seen for a number of organizations, that the CIP senior manager ends up being in one silo of the business, be it the IT side, and then may not have, that authority to really lead the CIP implementation for, other areas of the business, generation, transmission, for example. And, a lot of times that results with those organizations kind of doing their own thing, their own interpretations of the standards. And so then you have inconsistency within the same organization. which does not bode well when it's audit time.
No, I think you nailed it right there, Leonard. It's where the decision rights sit. Do they have the authority to make decisions to make sure the subject matter experts on the ground are doing what they're supposed to be doing? If not, do they have the ability to go get that authority? I think we've seen that a fair amount, where maybe it does live at a lower level, but there's either a direct line or a dotted line to somebody who does have those decision rights. That's always a risky proposition, though, because if you go to that person and you have that dotted line or that straight line relationship and you can't convince them to do what needs done, do you really have that authority as outlined in the definition? Kind of gets into the next question I've got, beyond where does it live in the organization, which I think is a philosophical debate that we could go on and on ad nauseum. But what's more important, to have the subject matter expertise to know the ins and outs of the standards, or the organizational capital or decision making ability to drive the program forward? The answer is both, but often
Yes.
that does not exist in the same person. So where would you like to see that move towards?
It has to be both. It has to be both. And senior leadership inside these organizations, no matter large or small, have to empower these leaders to be effective in that role. And so that means giving them access to the purse strings so they can buy the tools from an automation perspective, get access to the personnel they need to effectively manage not only their compliance programs, but the overall security. If people look at, CIP as a line item or a budgetary item, and really they need to look at it as a control, right? This is an investment so that we're preventing violations, but not only violations, but, potential risk from bad actors that are out there. So, recognizing that at senior leadership levels to empower the people wherever they are inside the organization to be effective.
Yeah, as a person with a vested interest in the reliability of the bulk electric system, I concur. You're speaking about, purse strings and automated tools, automation tools. Any thoughts on current automation tools you're seeing in the industry, Brent?
There are a lot of different ones out there, and certainly folks have even gone to the homegrown level where they're building their own internally, and that's great. I think staying vendor agnostic or tool agnostic, it really is, regardless of what you choose, the tool you select, make sure it works for your organization. Make sure your people are trained. You really want to empower those people by providing the right set of tools that don't become shelfware, right? That's my fear and worry that I see consistently day over day, is tools that get brought in by someone because this is a great solution. Well, it doesn't go anywhere because you don't get traction inside the variety of organizations, and therefore no one uses it, no one wants to use it, even though it was a fantastic tool and does a lot of great things. So helping your CIP senior managers recognize, hey, there's value here, but you have to have buy-in from the people who are actually going to use the tool to make it really effective.
So I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate on that one a little bit and come back with some of the pieces that I've heard in various utilities. Is CIP is just one small piece of all the things they have to do. So over prioritizing is kind of taken a bit of a turn, I think we've seen, particularly where the CIP audits have gotten to be lighter touch or more risk-based, I believe is the proper term. And seeing utilities look at that and say, it's important, so is everything else. Right now, what's more important is this other new set of standards, or getting an outage so we can get a plant upgraded, or getting a new transmission line in. Some of those pieces, whatever the latest personnel management side is. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the beast, is all this stuff is cyclic. And when you're on that downswing, it's kind of a hard sell to say, hey, CIP still is important. We need to make sure we're at the front edge of this. How would you approach that conversation?
Well, I mean, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? And, we haven't had, it hasn't been in the news of late, to be honest. I mean, obviously there's new CIP standards coming out, but new versions continue to come about. But, until someone, say, tries to drive a car through a gate of a nuclear facility, it's out of sight, out of mind. But the light touch on the audits, just coming out of the WEC conference last week, I mean, we heard that from a lot of the utilities that were in attendance and conversations, sidebars and whatnot, that it's having a detrimental effect on their compliance departments because it's directly impacting their budgets, because management's saying, oh, wow, we're doing pretty good. I guess we don't need to spend all this money on compliance. And so whether that's being, less purse strings to talk about the tools, as Brent was referring to earlier, or, headcount being reduced, it's unfortunate. That pendulum will eventually swing the other way, and it won't be pretty when that happens.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. There's two additional external factors that, Leonard mentioned one there, right? The shrinking of budgets based on the lack of the simplified audit approaches that we've seen recently. I'll be kind and say it's simplified audit approaches that we've seen. But there are other external factors. You look at the cold weather standards and how that's having an impact on not only NERC O&P, but NERC CIP. NERC produced a report, I think just this week, where they talked about, hey, we're at high risk in the Northeast. We're very high risk in some of the Canadian provinces. And so, when a company looks at that and says, well, what are we going to do to shore up against this so that we can prevent outages, right, blackouts from occurring, and budget gets pulled from those areas. And you look at, NERC just issued a request using Section 800 the other day on remote access capabilities from foreign entities, foreign countries, foreign nations. So these factors, things of this nature, tend to pull away and draw budget, money, resources away from our critical efforts that we're doing to not only maintain compliance but security of the BES, and that's greatly concerning. And as a CIP senior manager, I'd be pulling my hair out right now, just wondering how do we accomplish everything that's in front of us given these external factors that definitely have an impact on us.
I think you just nailed it there, Brent. I think for so long, a lot of compliance managers managed and kind of used the compliance risk as the reason for doing things rather than the security risk behind it. And I don't know how many times we've been to different utilities across the continent where compliance and security are in total opposite parts of the organization, and they don't have those communications to figure out, okay, what is our actual risk here? I know that was one of the things when I first got to Grant that actually upset our compliance manager, because I included CIP and FERC dam safety compliance in my risk register for security, and it honestly was fairly low, because how that would hurt the utility compared to things like an actual cyber attack, an active shooter, a physical attack on one of our critical sites, it paled in comparison. Honestly, even the $1 million a day compared to a $100 million event, that's a lot of days of violation. I mean, and even the biggest fines pale in comparison to the damage we saw last winter with the physical attacks. And that's just a couple idiots getting into a substation. That's not a dedicated cyber attacker who knows what they're doing. Kind of creating that kinetic attack through cyber.
And therein lies the challenge, right? Is you have all these external factors that are pushing, and people forget, like, I'm just doing this to be compliant. No, you're doing this to prevent, other issues from occurring, that can have a massive impact on our organizations.
And I think that's where the value of having a CIP senior manager, kind of coming back to organizational capital versus subject matter expertise, they got to have both. Even if it's balanced and they're not the experts in both, they need that ability. So they can go beyond, hey, this is just what we're seeing from our last audit, not managing to the last audit they felt. Considering we've seen one or two utilities in our day, what are some of the missteps or horror stories you've seen around the CIP senior manager or delegations, of that entire concept of a CIP senior manager?
So, again, the challenges I see is right-sizing it that I've seen in the past, where they've handed it off so many times as a CIP senior manager, and everyone's pointing this direction. No, this person's got it. This person's got it. No, this person is the CIP senior manager. Where you see a lot of churn over a period of less than 3 years, that puts you in a really bad spot, because you don't have consistent leadership at the top. You don't have consistency in operations. You don't have consistency in strategy. That can really sink a compliant ship pretty quickly. So that's the biggest concern or biggest challenge that I've seen, is the movement and the churn of CIP senior manager year over year.
Yeah, and sometimes the lack of churn looking at this from the complete opposite perspective, when that churn eventually does occur for whatever reason, this person's been doing it so long or faking it for so long that then they forget, oh, we need to identify a new CIP senior manager now. This guy retired 6 months ago. And so then they're in a situation where they failed to identify a new CIP senior manager and document that change within the required time frame. So, that's the other extreme. Delegation, another area we haven't really touched on a ton, but, there's tons of CIP standards that require the approval or of a CIP senior manager or delegate. And, just because, you're allowed to delegate responsibility to someone else, does that mean that you should delegate in every case? For all is said and done, CIP senior manager is doing very little from a requirements perspective. Again, that leads to more hands-off scenarios where that leadership and, is frankly missing.
Yeah, very good point, Leonard. We talk all the time in our industry about succession planning and how important that is, and bringing up the next generation who's following behind you. The CIP senior manager is one of those things that's no one plans for the next CIP senior manager. It's kind of, you got the job until you either move on or retire, right? There's no plan in place to kind of help build those people up and strengthen the delegates, right? If that's the way you tend to use it. So that they're prepared and understand what the obligations are and can really help refine and define programs.
Speaking of delegations, what are some of the tasks that you think really shouldn't be delegated? They really need to stay with that CIP senior manager.
I would say as a CIP senior manager, if I were a CIP senior manager, CIP 2, my asset inventory is going to be reviewed, owned, and known by me. That's critical to everything that we do, right? Foundational is identifying the asset inventory and knowing where stuff is in transitions as it transitions into and out of our environments.
I concur. We've been in cases with clients where we've had to educate in advance of an audit on very basic understanding of the CIP standards and their own infrastructure, and that's not a good look. Kudos to the CIP senior manager for realizing, hey, I need some education on this prior to being in front of auditors, but it's still a little late in the cycle to realize you need that level of understanding. Speaking of CIP senior managers and auditors, again, in my former life as an auditor, it always used to amuse me when the CIP senior manager was there to shake hands, and greet everybody for the opening presentation. And then you never saw them again for the entire week. That speaks volumes about how, important NERC CIP is to your CIP senior manager when they can't even be bothered to, sit at the table for the week. In some cases, they wouldn't even show up for the closing presentation at the end of the week. Not a good look.
But as far, I'll work off the opposite of that, your question, Nick, as far as what should we be using our delegates for? To me, it's the tactical type things that happen on a regular cadence. Security patch mitigation plans, as an example, extensions and handling of those, right? That can be certainly, push down to the delegate level, because you may have multiple business units. We've talked about that, right? That are doing these things, and the visibility for a single senior manager to accommodate all of those may be challenging if you're a large organization. So using delegates where they're appropriate, to me, a great example of that is patch mitigation extensions.
Brent, that's a great point with the delegation piece, particularly tactical. I know that's something we used at Grant extensively. But how do you monitor and manage those when you do send that out? I know that's one of the things we saw a lot as auditors, where kind of those delegations become a fire and forget blanket abdication of responsibility. How do you make sure that's not the case if you're that CIP senior manager?
There has to be, recognizing the role you play as a CIP senior manager in the organization, there has to be follow-up, right? There has to be check-ins. There has to be some periodicity where, I don't know if I've seen some CIP senior managers, they meet with their teams, the delegates or the asset owners, on a semi-monthly basis, multiple times per month. I think that's an appropriate cadence to kind of check in and see where things stand. As a CIP senior manager, I'd want to know, how many mitigation plans are out there and how many have been extended, so that we're keeping track of that and not letting that, you know, become so big and so vast that we can't deal with it or unravel it. Yeah.
Brent, that's a very optimistic perspective you have there. I'm a little bit more pessimistic in my opinion in that regard. Historically speaking, you know, the industry's been more reactionary than proactive in addressing issues like this. So while I certainly hope that many CIP senior managers will be assertive in correcting any of those deficiencies, you know, I think the majority will be more, you know, until pain is felt in some shape or fashion, be it from, you know, a security incident that personally impacts their operations, or if they happen to have a extremely bad audit that includes significant penalties and fines. You know, I think a lot of them will have to wait for that scenario to play out before there's a change.
Unfortunately, you're right, Leonard, and you know, more often than not, we see that as the mode of operation in the organizations. But you know, it's up to us, right, to evangelize this stuff, to share it with people and say this is the right way to do it. You know, from building your program all the way down, is really having you know, this person, whoever this is, as a CIP senior manager, with the right horsepower and authority to do their jobs effectively. And so, you know, a message to all CIP senior managers out there: take it seriously. Look for opportunities to improve. Look for enhancements. Look for, you know, controls that you can put in place that will help prevent recurrence of violation, but keep you aware of the, you know, the position that your organization's in, both security and compliance.
I think one of the big ones for us is that the compliance team was never on the delegation list. We were kind of the enforcers or the reviewers of it. And like, I met with the CIP senior manager, I think monthly, and then the full executive team quarterly, including the board. But part of the expectation was that I was going to give them the good, bad, and ugly. And if somebody wasn't getting things done, that was an immediate escalation. Grab their boss, say, hey, this is not getting done. That was their one shot to get it fixed. If not, right to the CIP senior manager, who was our COO, and had that ability to go get people moving on things. Well, thanks for joining, guys. I think it's been a great discussion. There's a lot of things to consider as you're looking at who your CIP senior manager is and what their responsibilities are. And if you are a CIP senior manager, all the things to consider. It's definitely it's a choose your own adventure, no matter which way you go. I'd say no right answers, lots of wrong answers. And if you are not a CIP senior manager or compliance person, feel free to share this with them as kind of some of the things to consider as they're taking this on. I know for a lot of executives, it's just another duty is assigned until their first audit rolls around. So the more you can help them get ahead, the better. So with that, thanks for joining. Everybody take care. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Stay up to date on all the videos we release here at Archer by clicking on the subscribe button. Click on the bell to be notified right away when we release new videos. If you know of a topic or someone you think we should talk to on DirectConnect, please let us know in the comments below.